Okay, so as you know, we're here for the non-evil XSS and Drupal and EasyXDM presentation. My name is Stephen Barker. I'm from Sarasota, Florida, a company called Digital Frontiers Media. We're one of the gold sponsors for Florida Drupal Camp. We have been sponsoring Florida Drupal Camp for the last 2 years, I believe. We have more participants this year from our company because we are expanding, and if you guys are interested in freelance work, sometimes we do have work for overflow work that we might be able to use additional help on. My background is I was a computer programmer back when I was in high school, and then I abandoned that to go chase fish in the Pacific for about 17 years, and then I kind of got back into computer programming. Got into Drupal in 2006 when I wanted to start a company, and I went, well, what should my website be? I was thinking more that we would do digital media, like video and that sort of thing, and what it's evolved into is that Digital Frontiers Media mainly is a Drupal development house, but we specialize in integrating other types of media, third-party web services, and that sort of thing into the Drupal platform. Okay. So, how many of you are signed up for the Drupal security advisories? All right. So, for those of you that aren't, you can go to your user profile page on d.o and sign up for them. And it's pretty interesting because it will give you, well, what day do these security advisories come out? Wednesdays, right. Wednesday afternoon, usually your mailbox will fill up with advisories saying this module had some sort of problem with it. This one's kind of interesting. I just pulled this image the other day. I didn't even see this one. That one escaped my attention. Denial of service attack on Drupal core. That's kind of cool. In any case, Symantec has done studies that show that about 70% of all of their web vulnerabilities end up being cross-site scripting attacks. That's quite a few. When you consider all the possible means of doing some sort of attack on a website. SQL, some of the old standards were SQL injections and things like that, but most of them seem to be these days cross-site scripting attacks, and almost all the things, like a number of the things you see coming out of the out of the Drupal advisories are typically XSS sort of things, and they all have to do with sanitizing inputs most of the time. So when I typed in, well, let's get some definitions here. What is the definition of, XSS? You type in what is XSS or whatever in Google, and you get something that's similar to this, which is cross-site scripting attacks are a type of injection problem in which malicious scripts are injected into otherwise benign and trusted websites. Cross-site scripting attacks occur when an attacker uses a web application to send malicious code, generally in the form of a browser-side script, to a different end user. What the hell does that mean, really? This is kind of an obscure thing for a lot of people to figure out exactly what's going on. And even like if you have done a lot of Drupal development or something of that nature, maybe you do a lot of programming, just reading this sometimes can be or even a number of the other definitions you might find online can be a little harrowing trying to figure out exactly what that means in an implementation phase. A cross-site scripting attack example, according to Wikipedia. Wikipedia has like a couple of different ones. This one I thought is kind of an interesting one. It's short, it's concise, and kind of conveys the point. Mallory posts a message with a malicious payload to a social network. We'll get to exactly what that would be later. But then when Bob reads the message, Mallory's XSS steals Bob's cookie. Okay, the cookie, does everyone here know how Drupal authenticates you? It's a cookie-based authentication. So when you sign in, you say, here's my username, here's my password. Drupal will check it against its database and then return a session cookie saying, this is, I've authenticated you, and here's your cookie for this session, and you're good. What this is saying is that when Bob reads the message, Mallory is going to send the cookie, Bob's cookie, to Mallory. And then at that point, if Mallory has the exact same cookie, Mallory can then hijack Bob's session and actually go to that site, and Drupal will respond to Mallory as if Mallory is Bob. So you want to be very careful about XSS vulnerabilities, because of the fact that Bob may be user 1 on your site. So if Bob is user 1 and Mallory gets access to that cookie, Mallory now has the ability to do whatever he wants to the site, take the site down, add his own user that Bob doesn't know about, that has the same, the super admin role or what have you. So it's a very, very dangerous situation, what is possible with XSS vulnerabilities. Okay, how do you get that malicious payload in? Okay, this is one example, and it's actually, as written, this would never work. At least it wouldn't work. No, it wouldn't work at all. But it demonstrates the simple nature in which you can get a malicious payload in for a cross-site script vulnerability. Everyone knows your image tag will have some sort of source, and it has an HTTP protocol or something, and then a URL that will load in the content of the image. What people don't know is that prior to a lot of the modern browsers, some of the older browsers, IE7 and 6, they would just, hey, what's the source? The source happens to be a JavaScript. Let's load the JavaScript and let's execute the JavaScript by rendering it on the page. So you could actually go to forums where someone's talking about, their kitty, and you post like, I've got a picture of my kitty, and as long as the forum comments allowed you to upload an image, you could upload an image, fake the source of the image when you actually upload the HTML for the comment, to include a JavaScript on your own site, or just include the JavaScript right into the source attribute. And then it would run. And of course, in this example, one of the reasons why this wouldn't work even in IE7 is because I'm using a post message that I don't think works with the JavaScript engine for IE7, but this would be posting the cookie from whoever is currently viewing the site back to Mallory's site, to something where he's logging all the cookies and he's getting notification that, hey, another sucker. So it's not that difficult to inject it. It's just a matter of finding the right way to evade all of the filters. Like I said, this won't work because JavaScript protocols and other things like that are not allowed anymore in modern browsers, or at least I don't think they're supposed to. Most of them will just totally ignore that if you end up using that. But there is, I can't remember the name of the site, but there is a site that it lists all the different ways in which you can evade or evasion techniques that may or may not work. And it's literally like thousands of different ways in which you can try to evade a filter to get an XSS injected into a site. So XSS is bad, right? It's evil, right? Is it evil?
Worst thing.
Is it evil?
Yes.
Yes. No, it's not. And what's interesting is that when you do a search for XSS or cross-site scripting, the first things that come up are attacks. Like that definition that we just read, it's, I asked what is XSS, and it starts telling me about attacks. It says, it's a vulnerability that da-da-da-da-da-da, but really, cross-site scripting is just the ability to get information from one website to another, or move some information around between different iframes and that sort of thing. And it's not necessarily evil, it can be very useful. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to work on a project called MWIDX, Corrent and Winter, a company that no longer exists, and IDX, which is a protocol for real estate. This site, the idea behind it, this project, by the way, is no longer in operation as it was originally implemented because of the fact that it took too long for them to build out some of the other features, and in the end they just said, to hell with it. So I think the client got a little tired of waiting for a lot of these things. And part of it was because of some of these cross-site scripting problems. They're very complicated to try and solve unless you have a presentation that shows you how to get around. So, which I did not have at the time, and neither did the other 3 or 4 developers that were working on it at the time. But in any case, the idea behind this project was that there are 2, I think, real estate modules that are available on Drupal.org for Drupal 6. I think this was Drupal 6, and they they pull in information about housing listings through the MLS system and make them present them as nodes and things like that you can create views around. This is like a view that allows you to search for listings that match what you're searching for. So the idea was that, okay, there's tons of realtors out there in this Lake Tahoe area, and they all have their own websites, but they're all selling the same houses out of the MLS system. So let's build a Drupal site. Instead of building the same site over and over and over again, for all those guys. The idea was that we would just go ahead and create a single Drupal instance that would do all this stuff and could be the engine that is placed into just about any website. To basically embed this Drupal site, there were 2 requirements for the project. One was that there would have to be a JavaScript inclusion in this site. So basically, like everything from here down, from the nav bar down, would be Drupal in an iframe. Everything above would be like WordPress, Joomla. It really didn't matter. It could be just a Dreamweaver HTML page. Didn't really matter. But you had to include a JavaScript reference, and you had to include the iframe for Drupal. And then you could create all sorts of other content in the CMS of your choice. The idea here was that you would search in Drupal, it would return the results, and that's all fine and dandy. Problem is that when you do a search for houses in the Lake Tahoe area, and you search for a house that's, say, $250,000 and less, you get no results because they're all multi-million-dollar houses. So when you create an iframe, the iframe is always a particular size. You set the size of the iframe, or it has some default value. So when you return 0 results, you've got a very short window, and if you define your window as short, it's great. But if you search for houses over $1 million, you end up with 100 different results. You have a very long list, but your window is still very short. So you get the scroll problem. So what do you have to do? You end up having to write some sort of script that takes into account dynamic length content that's going to change whenever the iframe changes, and whenever the iframe reloads some content, to redefine the height of the iframe to be the scroll height. And this works great, except when you have content from one domain, like mwidx.com, which is actually the Drupal site running the engine, versus the domain name of the parent site for the iframe, which is myfavoriterealty.com or whatever. And what's the problem there?
Cross-domain.
Cross-domain. And specifically, this doesn't work because of this line right here, because you can't actually address any of the properties or the children of the iframe itself from a different domain. And the reason for that is, of course, the same origin policy is to keep people from one domain reading the cookie, like a session cookie, from one domain and passing it on to another, thus allowing someone to hijack the session. So, one of the ways that you get around that is through something called cores. Of course. Right? I just thought of that. Cross-origin resource sharing. It's a mechanism that allows a web page to make XML HTTP requests to another domain. Such cross-domain requests would otherwise be forbidden by web browsers per the same origin security policy. Cores defines a way in which the browser and the server can interact to determine whether or not to allow the cross-origin request. It is more powerful than only allowing same-origin requests, but it is more secure than simply allowing all such cross-origin requests. Basically, this is saying that it's more powerful than just being on the same, like if you had an iframe that's on the same domain as the parent, it's more powerful than that because you can cross information, but it's more secure than simply having a free-for-all so that you can do session cookie hijackings. So the way it's done typically is it's put in as one of the headers for the HTTP request, saying it lists specifically which domains that the parent will allow cross-domain requests from. So you have to be very specific. Okay, and what's kind of cool is that if you need to incorporate cores into your projects, and you're using, whatever, an ASP.NET versus a PHP or whatever, this site, right, enablecores.org, it has different ways. Well, it has like different ways you can set it up on your server, and it has the code right there and instructions on how to include that code into your server to allow cross-origin resource sharing, and also some code to help you use it across there. Okay. One of our more recent problems that involved cross-origin resource sharing was this particular site here, PGT, and this project offered some other challenges that were kind of fun to go through. They had a limited budget or limited time for their phase 1 deployment. They had an existing site that had a bunch of ASP.NET code that provided back-end dealer access to things like invoices and histories on orders and that sort of thing. There was not enough budget or time to develop Drupal methods that would contact their database directly to pull some of this information in. So the idea was spawned that we would simply iframe in that stuff, and that was all good and dandy until you start getting into the details of it. Iframing it in is cool, except that, okay, in this case, we actually need 2 authenticated sessions, because 95% of the features that were in the old site are being redone in the new site, in the Drupal site. So you only need the iframe for 5% of the content in the old site, the legacy site. So you need to authenticate the user in Drupal, but you also need to authenticate the user in the legacy site. The biggest problem with getting that to occur is making sure that you've got both session cookies, and for usability reasons, you don't want them to log into Drupal, and then when they hit the the link that happens to be that 5%, have them log in again to the old legacy site within the iframe. So you have to come up with some sort of method of doing something like this, where the new Drupal site, which is your local site or the parent site, consumes content that is going to be in an iframe. That's eventually what's going to happen. We're going to consume content from the old legacy site, the invoices and stuff like that. But we need to get that authenticated session cookie drop in from Drupal. But we also need to pass the username password, because we imported all the same user account information into Drupal, pass that information into the remote site and get a cookie drop there. Some of you may have, and this is the thing, we analyzed various ways in which we could go about doing this. We looked at using curl or something to just post this information, like on a Drupal submit handler, taking the submit handler and then reposting that information to the legacy site's login page, trying to get that information back, and then somehow like returning a cookie back to the user. But it all just seemed very complicated, when really, if only you had two windows that would talk to each other, it would be great, because you'd have the front end dropping your cookies right there. So this whole idea of having the hidden iframe where Drupal is sending information to there, logging in, and then logging itself in would work out just great. So you can, using cores, sit there and use post message and a bunch of other means of passing information back and forth between Drupal and some other site. But there's lots of little issues, like, so what's the data format that you're going to use for the information that you're sending? Is it cross-compatible with IE8? Is it, yeah, yeah, exactly. Is it secure? Is it something that if it's intercepted that it can be found? So all of these things, some brilliant people took some time to actually work out all of this stuff and build this EasyXDM library. And as you can see, it's used by Twitter, Discuss, as we learned earlier today, LinkedIn, Scribed, and all sorts of other sites. How many of you have actually used or seen EasyXDM before? Yeah. You've used it, and what do you think? Do you like
I haven't used it yet.
Okay, yeah, seen it. It's, I'll tell you, if you're looking through the examples, how-tos, and some of that stuff, it takes a little time to understand, because the documentation, it assumes that you can read their mind in a couple of places. So hopefully this will make it a little easier. The hardest thing to kind of like grasp is, like, in your head, a lot of times you're thinking local, remote, and they keep calling things consumer and provider, and sometimes you keep thinking, well, the page I'm on is the provider, but it's actually the consumer of the iframe content. So you kind of end up confusing yourself. But it's excellent. It takes care of everything for you. You just have to make sure that you set it up correctly. Okay, so on the provider side, which in our case was the legacy site, it's providing the data that's kind of going to go into that iframe. In this case, we're trying to do something that's a little more complicated than just sending a message. And that's what's really, really cool. That's one of the real advantages of EasyXDM, is that it allows you to do more than just send a message. You can actually send a message to execute a script on the other side with parameters. So in this case, on the legacy site, we set up the provider, and we set up a method here called login, and that method takes a name and a password as its parameters. And then here I just use some jQuery, where I'm just taking name and sticking it in into their input field for username, password, putting it into their input field for password. And then this is probably the lazy way out, but I just clicked on their button using jQuery. You could probably use a submit there, and I think I put that. But so basically what I'm doing, I'm just taking the data that was sent from the consumer site, sticking it in the inputs, and then hitting the click button using jQuery. I hit the click button. All right. Back on the consumer site, the PGT, the Drupal site, like a lot of this stuff here, it's not even necessary. If you're doing one-way communication, it's not really a big deal. Here you could add like an additional, like I'll show you in a second as we get a little farther along in the code. I use a very kludgy way of dealing with when has it actually logged the person in on the far side. You know, what I do here is I just do a timeout. But you could do something where you send a message to log in, and then on the far side, it sends a message saying I'm logged in to execute something here to do the rest of it. But the most important part here is that you set up for the consumer the remote location of where that data is going to go. Okay. So there are probably numerous ways to interrupt Drupal's normal login, and we kind of touched on one before where we were talking about, oh, maybe we could add a submit handler where we interrupt Drupal's normal flow, insert our own submit handler either into the order of submissions or into the or just replace it outright to send information to the far side, and we kind of poo-pooed that idea. But here I thought the easiest way to do it is just in jQuery, replace the login form submit with this function, and all this does is it kills the submission to Drupal in just about every browser, which is pretty cool. So what happens is right here, you click on the submit button, you enter in Drupal, the username, password, hit submit, and nothing happens, which is exactly what we want to happen until we get to here, where we perform a remote RPC login using local Drupal login form field values. So all we do is we address the consumer, which we set up before. We call the method login, and then we just pass it the username value and the password value. And then, as I said, there's probably a more elegant way to handle this, but what I did here is, after I've sent the information to the legacy site for logging in, and it clicks the submit button, I just wait 5 seconds, and then I go ahead and I unbind that submit function that killed everything on the form submission, the Drupal form submission, and then I submit it manually. So then the Drupal submission actually goes through, passing the username and password fields into Drupal for validation. All right. So here's the demo, and here's the part that may or may not work, ladies and gentlemen, because the site was down a little while ago. So let me go ahead and check.
So as you're doing that, you actually, I mean, you have to do all of this client side. You couldn't interrupt the Drupal side login anyways, because if you did it server side, your cookie wouldn't be set on the client.
Right, exactly, and that's what.
If you use like curl or something, the server would get the cookie, not the actual client.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out, is there some way in which, oh, you can do it on that side and then get the cookie or get the returned information, and no, there really was no real way to do it other than
I mean, I guess you could, if I thought about this theoretically, you probably could grab it. So you could grab the username and password. So if I was being malicious, I could set up a fake site, take a username and password, go and log into the actual real site that you were trying to log into. Well, my server would then capture that cookie and the login information. It's just text. Store that there. I could then send back a positive result that goes over there, and the actual cookie itself, but just as text. Then have client-side JavaScript recreate an actual cookie and put it on the hard drive, and then send you over to the real site.
Yes. But see,
not saying that I would do that.
Yeah.
But you know, if
but see, it also requires like someone to log into that site and.
Yeah. So how do you deal with a negative login though? The password's wrong.
Oh, well, in this case, nothing would happen because if their password is wrong, what's going to happen on the far side is you will not get a cookie returned. It's in a hidden iframe, so you don't see any error messages or anything. And then on the Drupal side, it'll just say your username is incorrect. Because it still goes through the unbinding and then resubmission.
Here's like Drupal, because the passwords are synced, so.
Yeah. In this case, there was some 15,000 users, and we imported all those users in so that all the usernames and
everything
and passwords match. This is, let's see, how are we doing on time here?
You're about up.
I'm about up.
15 minutes, right?
Oh,
I think it's 5, yeah.
oh, right.
Yeah, so I've got about 5 minutes, which is about what I was thinking. If you go to
But we need like 10 minutes to brainstorm how you would use this in good methods.
Right. Well, yeah, but this is a good method, you know? Because, I mean, this is actually the second or third site where we've ended up having someone approach us about, we need something that needs dual authentication. And here's the deal. For us to pull this off, all it took was including the EasyXDM library on both sides, one JavaScript file on each side, and you're basically done. I mean, that's pretty easy compared to all the other crap. Well, you also have to turn on cores to allow the communication from that specific domain.
So EasyXDM does rely on core.
It does. Well, let's say this. I believe so.
Oh.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy considering how difficult it is, trying to like piece all this crap together normally. So if you go to EasyXDM site, they have some methods here to just test it off of the main site. I think there's little examples, and you can hit some of this stuff. Right here, this is the provider and the consumer. So this is the provider iframe. The thing is it's less impressive here because they're on the same domain. So while it works, it's not quite as impressive. Let me just make sure that we still are connected to the internet, which we are. And we will go ahead and sign in here. Did I click it? Or did I miss it? Okay, there it goes. That was your 5 seconds right there, right? Okay, so looks like we have successfully logged into Drupal and gotten past that. So in here is where they had that 5% content that was only available on the legacy site. Let's see if we're logged in and we get content. Oh no, my gosh. It did not work. Okay. Well, trust me, it works last week. Let me go ahead and see if I can log back out again. And part of that actually might be the kludgy way in which I currently have the code. So maybe if we did it in a different way, where we actually wait, because it could be that the legacy site did not respond within 5 seconds, so we never got the actual cookie response. Okay, well, crap. All right, it's not going to work today, but take my word for it, it does work. I don't think there's really anything else that I had here besides to go through the demo, which did not work, but in any case, let's see here. Oh, I do have detailed instructions for implementing the EasyXDM at this location, at this URL, if you wanted to go and get more information on how to do it, because like I said, the EasyXDM documentation is not all that great. So, sorry that I didn't get the demo to work for you. Anyway, that's all I have, unless you have any questions.
Yeah, can you go back to that last slide real quick? I know
Oh,
that's
sorry.
important, but...
Yeah, the slides are up there on on the Florida Drupal Camp website.
Oh, that's kind of nice.
Are your slides are up in advance?
Yeah, I
Oh,
posted
okay.
them just like 20 minutes ago.
Oh, perfect.
It'd be a problem if the user changes password.
Yeah, but except that their legacy site has a method for changing password. So you just add in another EasyXDM remote procedure call that passes in a new password to that new function, to that function. So that way it does keep them in sync, which has not been implemented at all yet. We haven't even started on that, but it's not really any different than passing it into the login form. It's just passing it into the reset password form.
Yeah, and but then that would be something you could do on the Drupal side, too, on the server side. Because when I go to change my password, I edit my account in Drupal, since that's acting as the front end, and I change password, I hit submit. You can grab that as a submit handle as a Drupal module, and be like, oh, this person's changing their password. And
Yeah.
grab their password, go over to the other system, because I'm assuming you have access to a backend database or whatever. You can use your own code, you don't have to, the browser's not involved in that at all.
Yeah, but
that would work.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you could use the same method though and just have a JavaScript that identifies when you hit the submit button on the user edit page, take the password, make sure that it's sent there to, make sure it's in sync on the remote side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same idea. Yeah, but that whole waiting 5 seconds thing is not really the best way to handle it. You should, and take it from someone who has just screwed up in front of all of you. You should definitely have something on the other end that waits to get a validation or an actual yes, we have logged in, and then send a message back to the consumer.
Because isn't XDM, it's a whole I had never heard of XDM before this, so I was Googling and looking at it. But it's a whole messaging platform, so
Yeah.
you can send something over there, and then just on your site with jQuery, just put a little spinning beach ball or the things that we all hate, but like loading.
Yeah.
Right? But then, put a sync or a listener, depending on what programming you want to listen to, that's just waiting for a message to come back from the other side of XDM, and then it goes like, and that message back would be, you're logged in, like positive response, like we're good, and then you could take out the loading, or take it, then send it to Drupal,
Yeah.
and Drupal responds, then take out the loading.
Yeah, cool.
Or take it and be like, oh, that failed, and then you don't even go to Drupal.
Yeah.
But it's a messaging platform, so
Yeah,
it's kind of a
it's-
cool library.
Yeah, it's really cool. The fact that you can, it's not just that it's cross-domain messaging, it's like you can call methods on the other side. Like it doesn't, you can, any JavaScript that you have that's on the far side, like you could have UI elements on the provider site that you're manipulating through code. I mean, the whole idea that kind of spawned all this was that the resizing of the iframe and stuff. What you can do is just on the Drupal side, inside of that MWIDX, is the Drupal side would load up its content as soon as it was done. The DOM, ready in Drupal would send a message to the parent of the iframe saying, okay, I'm done, resize to this size. So you have a resize method on the consumer site that says, resize to whatever the parameter is that's passed to me by EasyXDM. So you can do all sorts of things. And you could actually use something that you click on the parent site to close windows or open up divs or something on the provider. All sorts of things you can do with it. It's really, really cool. Any other ideas or questions? Or cogitations? Agitations?
Yeah, I was agitated with trying to figure out, and I didn't even know. I was going to tell our Java guy about it, but I couldn't even figure out certain things about it. But how to install cores on a JBoss server on the other side. And so that's why I was like, well, does this require cores or not?
Yeah,
But,
I think it does.
yeah, so that might have been what stopped me when I was reading through some of those posts on there, but I don't remember, it's like a month ago or something like that.
Yeah, that enablecores.org. It has like multiple, like for different systems,
Okay.
how you actually get cores running on those systems
Cool.
in different ways, like either in source code or in headers or and what have you, and how you do it for each. Is that it? All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.